Brian Stevenson, some of you might know his work, spends his career challenging the justice system's bias against minorities, against the poor. He works in the courts, he writes, he lectures widely, educating, opening people's eyes up to where the justice system isn't just. He tells this story. He says, Brian Stevenson says, I was giving a talk in a church. An old guy in a wheelchair comes in. He's sitting in the back. He's staring at me. Older black man. I finish my talk. All the kids seem fine. But this older black man is just staring at me the whole time I'm talking. He has this really angry look on his face. He's really distracting me. When the kids go, this man comes up to me in his wheelchair. He has a kid roll him up to me. And he gets up in my face and he says, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I look at him and I don't know how to respond. And he says it again, "Do you know what you're doing?" And I step back and I start mumbling something. And he says to me, "You're beating the drum for justice." And then he says, "You keep beating the drum for justice." And it moved me. He grabbed me by my jacket, pulled me into his chair, turned his head and said, "Let me show you something, young man. You see this cut I have down here by the bottom of my neck? I got that cut in Greene County, Alabama, 1963, trying to register people to vote." And then he turned his head. He said, "You see this scar I've got by my ear? Freedom Summer, Philadelphia, Mississippi." He says, "You see this dark spot? I got that bruise during the Children's Crusade, Birmingham, Alabama." And he looked at me. He looked at me. He says, "People think I'm some old man in a wheelchair, covered with cuts and bruises and scars, but I'm going to tell you something." He said, "These aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars. These are my medals of honor. These are my medals of honor." You can transform your pain, or surely you will transmit it. Those words are from Father Richard Rohr, a Franciscan priest. He says, if we don't find a way to transform our pain, we'll always transmit it to those around ourselves or turn it in against us. And if your religion, he says, if your religion is not teaching you how to recognize, hold, and transform suffering, it is junk religion. It's a little bracing. I've heard at least a couple of times folks say, hey, Unitarian Universalism is an Easter faith with no Good Friday. A faith of boundless, ultimate optimism in the goodness of all things and hope for transformation. That's the Easter part. Without the dark night of the soul and the reality of suffering, which pierces and permeates every moment. That's the Good Friday part. But friends, let me clarify, lest you wonder if this is the case. We are not gathered in this house just to say nice things and think nice thoughts all the time. We are here in this house also to raise a lament. That old-fashioned word, lamentation, to raise to the sky a witness to the reality of suffering. To peel back all the false faces of the world that hide that fact. But lamentation is not despair. Our work is to hold lament in one hand and hope in the other, and not to guess at how or when or why which of these will win, but to walk through the world with sorrow and joy as our everyday companions. In the Christian tradition, in the story, Jesus sits down with his disciples knowing that he's going to be betrayed and abandoned to a horrific death alone, and still counsels them to love each other and the world all the same. Suffering and hope in each hand every day. We Unitarians believe the most important thing about the prophet and Rabbi Jesus is his life, the things he did, the things he taught. The religion he lived out, not the religion about him. The world of invitation. The world of justice that he and his people were rehearsing all through his ministry. One scholar says Jesus sought to prepare people for the inbreaking of the kingdom of heaven, for a messianic banquet, a party, a celebration among a mixed group of saints and sinners, tax collectors and patrons, women and men, faithful and doubters. And that message of his ministry was just the opposite of the world around him. He lived in a province of the Roman Empire where class kept people rigorously separated, where citizenship mattered about who you could talk to and who couldn't, who had rights and who didn't, where ethnic divisions cut neighborhoods, where your social location, where your job decided who counted as human beings and who didn't. If that sounds familiar, it's because not much has changed in 2,000 years. But in that moment, Jesus never once said, "Worship me," but he often said, "Follow me. Follow me, heal the sick, feed the hungry, care for the outcast, the widow, the poor. Build the kingdom here and now." There's a story in Luke's gospel on the way to Jerusalem, on the way to execution and death. Jesus stops to heal a blind man and welcome in a tax collector to hang out. Why, as the gospel is being put together, as the editors are deciding what the shape of that narrative, the arc of that story is going to be, why, as we journey towards Jerusalem, is there this side track about healing the sick and welcoming in the tax collector? Well, it's because one of the most important things that's going on is that everyone counts and everyone matters. Everyone is welcome in the beloved community. And the reality of suffering does not negate one tiny bit the reality of welcome and of human dignity. Jesus isn't attempting, as he arrives in Jerusalem, a political coup. He's not attempting in his ministry anything other than the radical and absurd establishment of beloved community right here and now on earth. A quality of experience, a way of living, which can be transformed and transformative no matter what happens in the power structure. Transformation starts with what we're doing, what we're acting, who we're welcoming, and that's the threat against empire. That's the threat against the status quo, which depends on haves and have-nots, a system which depends on some people being outsiders and some people being insiders, a system so insidious that often when we ask another person, "What do you do for a living?" what we're really asking is, "How much respect should I give you?" It's woven in deep, but empire only works if we treat our enemies badly. Empire only works if some people get respect and some people don't. The status quo only stays until we love our enemies and open our doors to empire's outcasts. And that work, that's what Jesus was executed for. There is no empire without enemies and iniquity. For us as Unitarian Universalists, this Easter story is a final parable for a rabbi who constantly talked in parables. And when you hear a parable, when you hear a myth, you don't first ask, did this really happen? You ask, what does this mean? Why does this matter? What in this is true, even if it didn't happen? What in this is true? Lament and hope hand in hand. What in this is true? That among broken and broken-hearted people, us, no one is left out of love, no one is less. What in this story is true? Vision and reality hand in hand, knowing that failure is a fact of life, that suffering and death are facts of life, and nonetheless, it is worth giving our days and our years away to love. Jesus then was a citizen of a country which did not yet exist and does not yet exist, trying to show what it looks like. That line, that image is from Dr. Vincent Harding. He was the first director of the MLK Memorial Center. He says, we, he means you, he means us, we, right here this morning in this room, we are citizens of a country that we still have to create. A just country, a compassionate country, a forgiving country, a multiracial, multi-religious country, a joyful country that cares about its children and its elders, that cares about itself and about the world, that cares about what the earth needs as well as what individual people need. He says, I am and you are a citizen of a country that does not yet exist and that badly needs to exist. And I want to offer you the opportunity to pledge deep that you're not going to give up this life without offering yourself to the creation of this country. He's speaking there about beloved community. He's speaking about what Jesus called the kingdom of heaven. And that message then, that truth, that call to hope did not die. The Greek statesman Solon says myth isn't about something that never happened. It's about something that happens over and over again. I don't believe in the fact of the resurrection, but I hear the truth of it when scars become medals of honor. And I don't believe in the fact of the resurrection, but I hear the truth of it in every call to make the beloved community real. And I don't believe he literally came back from the dead, but the message didn't die with the man. I hear it alive in Dr. Harding's words, pledging himself and inviting us to the creation of a country that does not yet exist. I hear it alive in Dr. King inviting us into beloved community. I hear it alive in the voice of that man in the wheelchair who says, you keep on beating the drum for justice. Lament and hope journey hand in hand. Resurrection, again and again and again. Amen.